So welcome everyone to our session today on work opportunity tax credit for employers. I'm so delighted that all of you are taking time out from your day to join this very important session. I'm thrilled to be able to welcome our two speakers as well, Dave Lux and Christine Perkins. So we really enjoyed, we did a practice session with them about a week ago, and it's going to be a really informative session for you today. So I won't belabor things. My name is Todd Herman. I'm the Vice President of Development and Community Relations for the Bobby Dodd Institute. And before we get started, I just wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors and thank them for all of their support. The Atlanta Foundation, as well as Disability Inn of Greater Atlanta, Georgia Tech's Excel program, and the Georgia Tech Institute for Leadership and Social Impact. We're thrilled that they support this series, and they've been with us from the very beginning. So with that being said, I wanted to move on to introducing our two speakers for the day. So Dave Lux is an assessment manager with Koch Business Solutions, and he has 20 plus years of experience in helping clients attract, select, and promote employees. So Dave has worked on a variety of projects in the areas of selection system development and implementation, performance management, 360-degree surveys, background, drug screening, and as you're going to hear throughout today, WOTC, or WOTC utilization. So he comes to us from Michigan, so he's a graduate of Central Michigan University and the University of Michigan. And then Christine is a member of Ernst Young's indirect tax practice in Indianapolis. She's a manager on the WOTC account management team, and she partners with WOTC clients to help them maximize benefits from both federal and state employment incentive programs. She has also over 20 years of experience in account management and management roles, and she is a Boilermaker, having graduated from Purdue University. So we're thrilled to have them with us, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Dave.
All right, thank you, Todd. Make sure I got my presentation ready to go here. All right, do this and this and this. All right, there we go. Hopefully everybody is seeing the screens. We're going to talk about work opportunity tax credits today, and as Todd mentioned,
we're not seeing it yet, Dave.
Oh,
it's coming over.
Coming over a little slow.
Yeah, we don't have it yet.
All right. We could always go to plan B if you want to do plan B, if it's quicker.
Yeah, I can ask Katie to go ahead and I can make her the host here.
Yeah, we just have a few slides today, but it's important information for employers if they want to participate in this particular program.
All right, so Katie's now the host. She'll be able to bring it up.
Okay.
Dave, just keep going while I pull it up.
All right. Yeah, certainly. So, and, you know, like I said, we just have a few slides, but, you know, packed full of information. Hopefully the attendees on this particular program will get something out of this. As Todd mentioned, I've been, you know, I'm with Koch Business Solutions now, but I'll be talking about largely my experiences implementing the WOTC program with Georgia Pacific, which is frankly the largest of the Koch companies. So there we go. We got the presentation pulled up. Hopefully everybody on the call can see this. Nice picture of the Capitol there, appropriate for today. So a lot of information on this initial slide here, and I'll kind of break it down as we go through it. But it's important for everybody to understand that the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, it's a federal program. It's a federal tax program designed by Congress. And what it does is it encourages employers, both large and small, to hire and retain applicants from certain economically disadvantaged target groups, which we'll talk about in just 1 second. But the impetus for the program is we're shooting to help employers by giving them a tax credit for hiring certain individuals, and then certainly for those individuals who are hired, it could potentially move those folks from economic dependency to self-sufficiency. So, Congress designed this to hopefully be a win-win for both the employers and the people that they hire. The program has been around for a while, since 1996, so about 25 years, and you can see it started through a Small Business Act. So it's not just for large employers like Georgia Pacific or Koch Industries or anything like that. I think pretty much any size employer could do this. It's following certain steps, just like with any other government program, right? Now, one thing I want to talk about here is the part where we say it's designed by Congress. So, what that means to me as kind of a implementation manager within a large corporation is that, we give paperwork to applicants to complete, so hopefully we can see if anybody's eligible for this particular tax credit. Well, in the past, Congress has typically renewed this credit for a 1 year at a time. And then they would, they have to debate over lots of things in Congress, obviously, and then they finally get around to doing it again the next year, and then they renew it for a year. And so it would be a great world if they were doing this, let's say in November or December at the end of the year, so that when they voted on it and approved it, that come January 1, we know it's ready to go again, and we just kind of repeat the cycle. Unfortunately, what typically has happened in the past, up until recently, was that the program would lapse. And we would be, collecting all the paperwork for the year, and then December 31st would hit, and then we move into January, and technically the program has expired because it's only good for a certain period of time. And then Congress would meet, whether it was later that month or February, March, April, May, who knows, and then they would reapprove the credits and they would make them retroactive to the beginning of the year. So what we have chosen to do within our company, and certainly this is what I would recommend if you wanted to implement this as well, is that we just continue to collect paperwork on applicants for this particular credit. We never stop, because you can imagine the angst if you had to stop collecting the paperwork, and then when Congress finally got around to reapproving the credit, making it retroactive to the beginning of the year, we would then have to go find all the people that we hired at the beginning of the year and try to get them to do the paperwork, and that would be kind of just a mess. So we just continually ask our applicants who we are hiring to complete the paperwork, knowing that, or at least assuming that Congress was going to just reapprove the credits that they typically have been doing. Well, recently, they've kind of at least made me sleep a little bit better at night. They have approved the credit for a 5-year period. So no more of this annual thing kind of going back and forth, waiting to see if they're going to reapprove the credits. And well, they said, let's do it for 5 years. So at least that gives us a little bit of time where we know that the credit's going to be good, and we can just continue to collect the paperwork. So just realize it's not perpetual. It's not this will be here forever and ever and ever. They haven't done that. They have to kind of vote on it, in Congress, along with many other things. So that's the first thing we want to talk about. Second thing is, let's talk about some of those target groups, because you have to fall within one of the target groups to be potentially eligible for a credit. hopefully everybody can see the information on the slide there with the kind of the bullet points there. And one thing I do want to point out is, yeah, there's a number of different target groups listed on the slide, but if you want to see the actual full descriptions of all of these groups, I definitely encourage everyone just to go to the IRS website, irs.gov, and find the search box and type in work opportunity tax credit, and you'll get a list of results there. And I think one of the top ones will be the actual target groups, the full description. We've kind of summarized things for purposes of this particular slide, but you can see that we're targeting, lots of different groups, and each of these is very specific, and we've tried to just summarize some things here. For instance, the second group there, the qualified veterans. It's certainly not everybody who's been a veteran. Subcategories within that group would be if the veteran has been unemployed for a certain period of time, or if maybe they received food stamps, or if they were if they have a disability, a service-related disability. They could potentially qualify for this credit. You can see some of the other categories right below that where they have certain age requirements. So whether you are a food stamp recipient, which is SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or a designated community resident, you have to be between the ages of 18 and 39 to be potentially eligible for this credit. So it certainly kind of narrows down and kind of picks and choose, but this is still not just a very small number of people. There are still many people who fall into one of these categories, or even multiple groups of these particular categories. And if a company winds up hiring somebody who falls within these categories, they could potentially receive a tax credit when they file their taxes. So a number of different categories there. And then the very last thing on this particular slide that I want to point out it's all about timing. It's all about following the process, following the paperwork, and there's two critical dates. So I mentioned that, you give a form to applicants to complete, at least ones, you want to hire, and the new hire needs to complete this particular survey on or before their first day of work. And then the second date that is very important is that, okay, great, they've completed the paperwork, you've collected it, now what? Well, that particular form, which is a IRS form 8850, you can also find that on the IRS site, must be submitted to the state workforce agency within 28 days of their start date. If it's 29 days or beyond, even if they fall into one of those categories, one of the target groups, that is too late. And that's unfortunate. The company loses out on the potential to receive the credit. So Chris is going to chime in here real soon, but I've partnered with Chris at E&Y for years now to help us with this process. I'm kind of the inside person making sure that new hires complete the paperwork, and then Ernst Young helps us make sure we file things with the appropriate state agencies and get things in on time to try and maximize the amount of credits that we can earn. So that's just a whole lot of information there about WOTC, but hopefully it kind of gives you a nice little overview to get things going. If we can go to the next slide. So I mentioned one of the forms, right, has to be turned in within 28 days of the new hire's start date. This is very small, so I don't expect you to be able to read everything on that, but it's certainly, this is the 8850 form. It's an IRS form that you can find on their website, and you can see the candidate is entering a bunch of different demographic type information on the top, their name, social, where they live, and answering some questions which would indicate whether or not they're eligible for a particular category. So you can see it's a self-report form for this particular document. Other things to point out, on the bottom there is that we're looking for their signature. Obviously, if you just print out the form and fill it out by hand, we want you to sign and date it. If you do it electronically, we need to see kind of some words in the box that say electronically signed by, and then the person's name. So we need to kind of have everything buttoned up paperwork wise, or we could potentially miss out on the credit.
Dave, this is Chris. Just one thing to point out about this form. So for the employer, there is actually a page 2 of this form 8850. So your applicant or new hire is filling out this front side, and then as an employer, there is a bit more information that you would fill out on the second side, and then that's what the states are going to use when they're looking at the certification.
Right. Yep. This is just the applicant-facing piece, right? Exactly. Yep. Okay. So why do it, right? What's the point? Well, Chris will tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Dave. So, as Dave has alluded, it does provide a valuable tax credit to a company. So, again, maybe you're a company that hires 3,000 individuals and 50% of them are eligible. You send 50% of your forms to a state workforce agency, and those get certified. And maybe your credit only amounts to 500,000, or maybe you're a larger client that hires 150, 200,000 people a year. That credit is going to be in the millions. So again, it's going to reduce your federal tax income liability. So, as we stated earlier, it is a win-win situation for that new hire. One, they're getting employed. And then for the employer, it's that win-win because they're getting that tax credit that, again, overall helps the company, and hopefully they're hiring more people. So there's that benefit all around. So again, it just, it does hit that bottom line. It is an annuity, so annual credit is generated. The way that works is each new hire will generate credit basically once, though. So you won't generate credit year after year after year per new hire that gets certified. The only exception is the long-term TANF category. That is a 2-year credit. So based on, someone that is hired, so their first year they generate a certain amount of credit, and then the second year comes along and then we calculate 50% credit based on their hours and wages. So that's one that it's kind of out of the norm, but we'll give you a second year credit. But again, you basically only claim the credit once. Great question that just came in. Do applicants resist disclosing the information? So the program is voluntary. It's not a program that you can make mandatory. Now, being from Ernst Young, we do have some clients that choose to make the survey, choose to not do an opt-out. And so maybe in their ATS, someone can't get past onboarding tasks unless they at least click on the survey. But so really highly encourage them to do it. And again, just explaining that, it's a win-win, like we just talked about. It's reducing that tax liability.
Right. And Chris,
great question.
Chris, let me jump in here if you don't mind.
Sure.
As well. Just talking about my experience with it is, we certainly do not get 100% of applicants completing the forms. Typically, some parts of our company actually do, but overall, you're right. We certainly don't get everybody doing it, because anytime you're asking somebody for some personal information, there's people who don't want to do it, and that's their discretion, right? That's fine. It's voluntary, but we have found that by far the majority, and typically that's 85+%, typically on a monthly basis, they're completing the forms. So, and then, so we are getting the majority. By far, the majority are doing it. And a lot of it's how you ask, right?
Exactly.
if you ask somebody to do it, hey, you want to fill out a survey? Who wants to fill out a survey, right? Just for the sake of it, So a lot of people won't. But if you, have a chance to say, look, this is a great program. It certainly helps us as a company. with this, you're adding value from day one, right? When you don't know anything about the job and you're not really adding value, you're either training or learning or something, so you're not necessarily contributing quite yet. This is a way that a new hire can add value right out of the gate through nothing other than just how they answered the particular survey. So, we encourage people to do it. We strongly encourage people to do it, but we certainly don't force anybody to do it. And the good news is that the majority of our applicants do complete it. So, but It's not 100%.
And Dave, we've had a couple of questions come in, and Christine, as to the size that an employer needs to be. So one, somebody asked, how large does a business need to be in order to qualify for the program? And then how manageable is it for employers on the smaller side?
Great question. So I don't think there really is
No, I don't think so.
a bottom number of how many hires you have. It is somewhat labor intensive. So that's where you have to really, as an organization, decide, is the return on investment really worth it, right? So if you only hire a few employees, your credit will be fairly small, but yet the time that it takes to administer the program, submit your forms, and then obviously on your tax returns, fill out the proper forms and whatnot. So it's really a business decision on, if you're only going to get 50,000 in credit or even 10,000 in credit, is it worth the time and effort to administer the program? I don't know if that helps, but that's a tough one to answer.
But there's no minimum size
No.
of that you need to be as an employer,
so.
right?
No. Yeah. And then someone asked a question about the long-term unemployed category. So the point of that category is you have to be unemployed for a minimum of 27 consecutive weeks. So just that minimum, there isn't a limit on how long that person, maybe they're out of work for 50 weeks. That's okay. It just has to be the minimum of 27 weeks for them to be potentially eligible and get that certification. And then there was a second part to that question. Nope, I missed that. I think something about someone with disability.
Yes, the person was asking for somebody who had been out of a job for, I think, over a year from Walmart, had lost their job. And so that was...
Yeah, so they would fill out that section of the form that they've been unemployed for 27 consecutive weeks. And then, if that's certified, then the company that hires that individual will gain that tax credit. Are there any other questions?
I'm trying to see any credits available for employees that stay employed year over year. And I think, Chris, you've addressed that, where it's doesn't recur year after year. It's sort of that one employee.
Yeah.
Once they max out the credit, that's it.
Yeah, and then there's another question about who grants the WOTC certification. I can't remember if I know we'll cover that a little bit later, but in essence, so that Form 8850 gets turned into the state workforce agency. So each state has an agency. So that form gets submitted to them. They then review the form and confirm as best they can using online tools and state records. They do the best they can to confirm that the individual truly does qualify for the box that they checked on the form. So, if they said they had food stamps a certain amount of time, they'll confirm that, and then they certify that Form 8850. And so then, in Dave's instance for his company, Ernst Young, we submit the forms to the states on their behalf, and then we accept those certifications on their behalf. And so that certification is what will then generate that tax credit. You can't generate credit without a certification. And not all new hires that a form is submitted for will get certified in reality. So depending on the type of business, so like retailers tend to have a higher certification rate. So maybe 50 to 60% of the forms that get submitted to the states will get certified. Maybe it's a tech company, or maybe it's more of like corporate type positions. Those may be more in the 30%. So it really depends on your business and the types of positions. But on average, at least for our clients, we see kind of in that maybe the low end, 40 to 55, 60%. So good question. Did that answer your question? Hopefully. Another question just came in: if the employee quits or they're fired after the form is submitted. So that kind of leads me into a little bit more. So we'll get to that question here in just a second, Lori. So just kind of finishing this slide here, the WOTC credit can average anywhere from $2,400 for many of the eligible categories, with a max credit up to $9,600, and that is more for your unemployed disabled veterans. So again, if you're a company that hires a lot of, let's say, IT contractors from the military, your credit is going to really accumulate very quickly, as opposed to if most of your hires hit the food stamp category, that would be $2,400. So it's nice to have kind of maybe a veteran initiative, when you're hiring people. One of the other benefits of that, again, it kind of fosters relationships with your company within your community, right? If you're hiring people from the community, there are all those community-based organizations out there that help people find jobs as well. So really partnering with them. And then we kind of hit on this, but usually 15 to 25% of a company's applicant base falls into one of the target groups. So right now we're seeing an increase in the long-term unemployed category, because now that COVID, we're 6 months, well beyond 6 months, right? So people are beyond that 27 weeks, unfortunately, still. So we are starting to see that category really increase.
It still is, Chris, let me just jump in one second.
Sure.
That still is pretty impressive, though, if, you could say 1 out of every 4 of your hires,
right,
is potentially eligible for this particular tax credit.
Exactly.
Depending on what group they fall in, or 1 out of 5. I mean, that's still powerful, especially if you hire lots of people. That the money, kind of adds up pretty quickly.
It does, yeah. And then we just talked about this one, that you must obtain a WOTC certification before you can claim any tax credit. And so it's not just that piece of paper, that certification. There's a lot that goes into the WOTC calculation. If you want to go to the next page. So the credit is really based on a couple of things. So the number of hours the individual works and their qualified wages. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of the calculation, because it's quite involved, but I'll give you really the high level. So again, based on the hours, so an individual must work at least 120 hours before we can start calculating credit. And then that credit is based on 25% of the first, in a lot of the categories, it's up to the first 6,000 in wages. So that's where it starts to get crazy with some of the categories have different rules or stipulations. So the key thing to take away is they have to work a minimum of 120 hours. And so at 120 hours, we start calculating credit at 25% of those wages. At 400 hours, we start calculating that credit at 40% of their qualified wages. So you can see it really jumps. Now, the question came in from Lori: what if the employee quits or is fired after the form is submitted? That's okay, as long as, if the form got submitted, they never worked, no big deal. You're not going to generate credit. But if the form's submitted, they did work and they worked at least 120 hours, your company will generate credit for that. And then another kind of caveat to that is, let's say they were hired in January, they worked January and February, then they left for 6 months and they came back at, let's say, November. Those hours and wages pick back up where they left off. So, and that's just for that first 12 months. So, and that's my last bullet point there. So, you know, it applies to new hires only. So you wouldn't screen that person again when they come back, but their wages and hours will pick right back off up where they left off when they left the job in the end of February, as an example. Hopefully that answers your question, Lori.
Right. So Chris, let me throw out a question
Sure.
here about going back to the different target groups. You know, is there one that maybe is the most popular or the most eligible?
Yeah. So EY, across all of our clients, we see the food stamp 99.9% of the time is the category that generates the most, has the most eligibles. May not necessarily create the most credit, right? Because if you're a
Right.
company that also has a lot of veterans, you know, you're really going to get the credit on that end. But food stamps is generally the number one category. Like I said, long-term unemployed, that's increasing, but it's still one of the lower. And then I'd say the long-term TANF probably comes in second pretty consistently.
Okay. We got a particular question coming in about vocational rehab. So it's probably one of the smaller categories of eligibility. Any idea what percent is that might be? Is it kind of probably 1 or 2% or something small? Or
if I remember right, that one is fairly small, and I may be off, but I think it's under 10% pretty consistently.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's pretty small.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
So hopefully that answers
You guys have great questions. Thank
that
you.
question.
Yeah. So just again, kind of some quick reminders, you know, submitting that Form 8850 within 28 calendar days of the start date. The person must be certified. So number 2, they have to work at least 120 hours in order to start generating credit. And then, you know, if you do have a service provider like Ernst Young is for Dave's company, you know, we prepare an annual report and do all that calculation for them. And then Dave's company tax department, they put that information on their tax return. So again, it goes back to the question earlier, you know, if you're a smaller company and want to do this yourself, you know, just really looking at the ROI on it and how many people you hire, how many people you think will be eligible, you know, because it does involve that work on your taxes.
Right. But if it saves you $1 million or more, you know,
Then go
it might be
for
worth it. It might be worth it. But, you know,
exactly.
you know, but like you said, it's all about ROI. If you don't hire a ton of people, but the type of people you hire might fall into these categories, still might be worth it. You can file directly with a state employment agency yourself, right? You don't necessarily need a third party provider to do that.
But
a lot of it is, yeah, exactly. You know, but it's a lot of it is just keeping track of things.
Yeah.
And on the front end, you know, getting applicants to complete the form, right? If they don't do that, you have no chance. Right off the bat. If they do, you have to hand it in on time, and then it has to be certified, and then they have to stay and work for at least 120 hours. So, you know, a lot of hurdles have to be met. But like I said, if it's worth $50,000, $100,000 in credits, it's definitely worth it. You know, depending on how many you hire.
Yeah, and it is one of the easier credits, right? So there are so many different credits, and that's one of the questions that we got beforehand. If I can find that last page I had of questions, you know, does the tax credit vary by state? And we kind of already answered that, right? The WOTC credit does not vary by state, but there are so many different state credits that will vary. So outside of WOTC, there's a lot.
So that was our high level. I'm trying to check both the Q&A and the chat.
The other question that came in that we already answered, just to kind of reiterate, is it a one-time hiring benefit or renewable? Again, it's one time per hire. Any other questions?
But I can tell you that overall, Georgia Pacific's been doing this for years and years and years. And obviously, we've done the ROI partnering with E&Y, and it's clearly worth it because we keep doing it. But, you know, we hire a lot of people. But maybe it's where we're located and just, you know, using E&Y to help us at the various state agencies. You know, we found it to be a valuable program, not just for the bottom line impact on us, but once again, it's a two-way street, really. We're hoping it's a win-win, you know, moving some of those people from dependency to self-sufficiency. So, you know, plus, you know, a lot of things mentioned here on this slide. Good community relations when you hire people in that area. So, you know, overall, it's been a great program for us. And certainly encourage you to consider participating in the program if it works for you. A lot of information, you know, can be found on that IRS site. So, any other questions? Oh, I guess I'm looking at the Q&A here.
LaTanya asked about when the calculation starts. So you're correct. Once they
120.
start, they've worked 120 hours, then the calculation starts at 25%.
Okay. Company-based or person-based? I'm not sure I understand that from Mitzi, but I would say person-based.
Right. So
Based
each
on the applicant
individual,
they hire, yeah.
exactly. Each individual will generate a credit based on how they answered the survey and then how the state certifies them.
Right.
Yep.
So if a company receives a credit for an employee and the employee goes to another employer, does the second employer receive the benefit?
So that goes into a whole can of worms, Mitzi.
That's complicated. I don't want to deal with it.
Yes, there are successor rules. Pretty complicated to some extent. So in a way, yes, it could, but again, it just depends on how the whole purchase or acquisition, how the deal went down between companies. So if one company had someone, they screened them, they would take the credit up until the time that the person left. But if there's any balance of credit, then potentially the new company could take that. And I'll purposely leave it at that high level because, like I said, there's a lot that goes into that successor rule.
Right, but let's say it wasn't an
expert.
acquisition. Let's say it was not an acquisition or anything. Let's just say the employee quit and went to another employer. Well, I would think that other employer is a new employer, and if they participate in the WOTC, couldn't they get that individual to complete some paperwork? And I don't know if it starts fresh though, right?
Yes, it would. So if it's an employee, especially in retail, we see that all the time, right? They switch companies all the time. But so yes, they would rescreen with their new company. But if you're talking, like you said, any acquisition, anything from that standpoint, it's a different ballgame. But if it's someone that just job hops, they can screen at every single employer, and all those different employers can get that credit if, you know, everything else is met.
Right.
Good question.
Oh, great job, Dave and Christine. Before we move on, I just wanted to bring up a couple of questions that came in ahead of time. I think you answered all of them, but just in case, I thought I'd go through them. There was a question about whether the tax credit varied by state. I think you covered that piece. The one-time hiring benefit or renewable every year, you covered that as well. And how are people identified as qualifying? Is it self-disclosure or do they need formal documentation? So those were the three that came in.
Yeah,
I think.
So yeah, they're filling out that 8850 form. So self-disclosure up front, but once again, the state agency is doing the certification. So they're checking the various databases that Chris mentioned and confirming.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. great expertise and on the fly answering folks' questions. I know that people found your depth of knowledge very helpful, and we appreciate your time and helping us share all about WOTC. And as many of you know, this is one of a series of topics focused on really igniting the inclusive workforce. And our next session is coming up in March. So it is all about building a resume and interviewing 101. And so I hope everyone who's on this webinar can join us again on March 3rd. From 3 to 4. It's going to be probably one of our longer sessions, but there's a lot of content involved. And the question did come in about this presentation, and it will be sent out in its entirety. And this whole series is leading up to the live event, which is going to take place in October. And we are looking forward to that at City of Refuge on October 19th, where we will have some nice workshops, breakout sessions, as well as a general session really focused on the empowerment and employment of those living with disabilities. And so we hope you all can join us. We have the live recordings of all of the Igniting the Inclusive Workforce series sessions. They're available on the Bobby Dodd website. So you can just go there and click on the events page and you will find them all. And then we will also be loading all of the sessions onto YouTube. So that will be shared in the future as well. But you can connect with us through a number of different ways, your social media preferences. But we are thrilled once again that you have chosen to join us, and we look forward to seeing you again in March. So thank you all, and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. And thank you again, Christine and Dave. And
Thank you.
Our project manager.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Katie.
Absolutely. Goodbye, everyone.